Welcome to Seek Reality with Roberta Grimes. Joyous conversations about what the afterlife evidence and modern science combine to tell us is true about our one reality. You have nothing to fear. You are eternal and you are perfectly loved. Knowing the truth changes everything. Now, here's Roberta.
Welcome to Seek Reality. I'm Roberta Grimes, and I'm so happy you're with us today. Even people who are trying very hard to seek and to accept the whole truth about some big, gigantic new reality will sometimes try to avoid even thinking about some uncomfortable details about that reality. I'm sure you accept that, as I've had to accept it. And as you likely know by now, I have spent 50 years of my life, and that's no exaggeration, studying an amazing amount of afterlife evidence and trying to ever more deeply understand what happens at and after our deaths. And it's really all good news. But there are two areas that I've been trying to ignore, just two. I didn't want to know anything about negative entities, demons, nasties, all those non-transitioned beings roaming the world without a body and into making trouble. Jesus was casting them out, all the time. And they do exist for real, but they don't have much power, and you can avoid those guys. So I just avoid talking about them, except we have been discussing them lately a little bit with Peter Wright, but that's it. And also, I don't like the fact that when people are transitioning, sometimes, very rarely, they don't make the trip. They go off track and maybe even become ghosts for a little while. And I've never wanted to talk about that problem either. I've just assumed for most of my life that there haven't been enough such cases to really matter. But then perhaps 4 years ago, I met today's wonderful guest, and I learned something new and amazing. Actually, our great friend Mikey Morgan tells us now, news to me, that close to 25% of the people who transition do go off track, and most of them are rescued fairly soon, fortunately, and they're helped to transition completely pretty quickly. But still, that's a horrifying statistic when you think about it, and it speaks to the fact that our culture keeps people so ignorant about what actually happens after death and about why we even are here at all. Between religious leaders who make people afraid of hell and scientific gurus who insist that we blink out like a light, not true, there are really just a few of us who are teaching people the glorious truth that human life really is eternal. So people can easily become confused once they're out of their body, and then they can get lost. Then they become really confused. But then, of course, they do have to be rescued. That was news to me, but what I didn't realize until very, very recently was that there's yet another group of people who die at what are not planned exit points, and then they die, some of them under circumstances that make them actually not even feel worthy of completing their journey, and they want to hide, they want to disappear, as really, that they want to not exist anymore, which of course is impossible. So then about 4 years ago, I discovered that there really was something new under the afterlife sun after all my studies. That was when I met Father Nathan Castle, who's a Dominican priest who lives and works in a community of Dominican men and women serving the University of Arizona in Tucson. So it's hard to imagine anyone who is a more traditional Catholic than he is. Nathan Castle is he's a very spiritual man, and about 25 years ago, he was recruited by elevated people not in bodies to do spiritual rescue work. Before I first met Father Nathan, I already knew quite a lot about the more traditional kind of spiritual rescue work, and I even had experimented myself with learning how to do it under the tutelage of the late, great rescue expert, Bruce Moen. But to be frank, it would have seemed impossible for me even recently, impossible to imagine that the Catholic Church or really any Christian denomination would sanction something like spirit rescue work. I couldn't have envisioned such a thing. But then in 2019, I read Father Nathan's terrific first book. And if you haven't read it, you should. It's called Afterlife Interrupted, Helping Stuck Souls Cross Over. I was amazed to find that everything in it is completely consistent with what I had learned in doing all those decades of afterlife research. Father Nathan Castle is our wonderful guest today, and he's with us for the seventh time. I just still can't get over the fact that the Catholic Church is letting you do this.
Well, some of the language that you just used isn't exactly the language that the Catholic Church would use or that I would use, but the phenomenology, the reality behind it is that we survive our deaths, and that, well, like as a little Catholic child, I was taught that many people upon their death would go to some sort of in-between place called purgatory, and then they would each have some of their own work to do. Oftentimes, it was put in kind of penal terms that they had to serve a punishment for how many sins they committed or whatever. That was one way of thinking of it that I didn't really embrace completely. But the idea that the word means to cleanse, and that sometimes it was described as some sort of way that you might primp before you go to the wedding, or to some,
Before you go to the wedding. I love it.
Well, there must be times when you have some special occasion where you spend a little more time in front of the mirror, or put a little more effort into what you're wearing and so on. It was kind of put like that in my childhood, that if you're going to go into the presence of the King, of the King of all creation, you might want to do a little cleaning up first. We used to do that just to go to the airport. Do you remember that?
Yeah. Okay, fair enough. And so that's that. Do you think that the people, because I remember some of the stories from your books, do you think that's how the people were seeing it themselves when they didn't transition completely?
Oh, it varies. I remind Catholic people that there are 8 billion people on the planet right now, and 1.4 are Catholic, and so let's have a little modesty or humility about the fact that we don't run the whole universe, but we're part of it. Lots of the people I deal with are not Catholic and don't use those categories. They just describe things in their own terms, and we work with them to. We're really like the discharge staff in a medical center. The people that we deal with, my prayer partners and I, all died sudden traumatic deaths. Almost always. We get a few exceptions, but most of the time, they're people who were shocked out of their body and thrust into something next, and they're given the help that they need, and they progress to the point where they don't need that level of help any longer, and they're ready to move on, and that's where we come in. We help them get out the door. So I don't think of our work as rescue. We're just part of a continuum of care. Any of your listeners that have ever had to be in a hospital more than a day, everyone looks forward to leaving, and there's usually somebody all the way at the end of the process that helps you collect your thoughts and gather your things, and maybe ask you about your physical therapy or your upcoming follow-up appointments, something like that. We just help people kind of move along.
You're so modest about this, because the work that you do is really extraordinary.
It is extraordinary, and I believe me, every new experience is a learning opportunity, and even though I've done it for 27 years, I'm still learning new things. I have new stories in my upcoming book that just my guardian angel helped with one just the other day, and he told me something about himself that I hadn't thought of before. One of my partners has worked, but my guardian doesn't talk very often, but once in a while he does, and he did the other day. And my friend Michael, who was the prayer partner, had met him before and asked him, what do you do when the people actually leave at the end of a session? Do you ever go with them? And he said, well, I can be like you. I can make all my beingness be contained in one place, as though inside of skin. But I don't have to. I can both be with Nathan as his guardian, and I can let myself expand and for a while accompany the one who's leaving.
Huh. Fascinating.
Yeah, then he said, and you think of yourself as ending at the tip of your finger, but in fact, you have an aura that extends beyond that.
Yes.
That
Yes.
that we both have, both the human order and the angelic order have that in common, of a sense of being contained in something fixed, and then also having a nature that goes beyond that. So I hadn't thought of that before. That was just a new learning in the last week or so.
That's fascinating. Yeah, no, that is really interesting.
Yeah, and it makes
So,
sense. That
so
doesn't
how
seem
you
far-fetched.
say that you've been doing this for 27 years? Did you say
Yes,
that?
about that. Yeah. I
So,
didn't do it publicly out loud because I was busy running big campus ministries and staffs and fundraising and all the, pastoral counseling and all the things that came with a very complicated life. But when I got, I'm now 67, and when I stopped being a pastor and a full-time campus minister, I began talking about this and writing about it.
so in the very beginning, I know that when each of these experiences happens, it starts with a dream. They call
Yes.
you in a dream. How did the very first one happen? Is that how it happened? Say you had a dream?
Yes, it came in a dream. In fact, that was you said this is my seventh appearance on your show. That was the subject of the first one. We went into that story in a lot of detail. It was a dream where I'll try to be brief because I have told that story other places. But I was having a dream about finishing a round of golf, going into the bar with a friend, and in what golfers call the 19th hole, the bar, there was a silent auction going on. And there was all these auction items. So this was still my life, golf and fundraising for a nonprofit. And there was a nasty piece of art on the far wall. And I called my partner's attention to it and said, look at that god awful thing over there. Who would give that to a charity? But it had a compelling character around it where I wanted to see it more clearly, the way that we might gawk at a wreck on the freeway. We know that it's really unpleasant to see, but something makes us want to look. And I looked at it, and it moved toward me, and then inside this picture frame, I saw a man burning to death on the hood of a car, and I knew that I was being called. Back when we used to have pagers, I'd had to take a turn. Maybe Tuesday night might be my hospital night, and if there were emergency call for a priest at the hospital, the pager would go off on my nightstand. It felt like that I was being called, just not pager. So I prayed, talked to the person a little bit in prayer, not back and forth, just toward them. I tell them hello, and I think I got what you want me to see. I wrote it down, and then in the morning, I happened to be on retreat with a group of people, and one of them was a very gifted spiritual person who I had prayed with many times, and I just asked if she would, at a break, if we could go aside and have a little privacy and pray about it. And when we did, the man emerged, and she had the capacity to allow him to speak using her voice. And so we asked him how we could help, and that's how it got started.
Because many people listening now didn't hear, I'm sure, that first time, but that's fascinating. So that's how they called you to do this work.
That's how it got started. I hadn't been doing this work, but in childhood, I was praying for the souls in purgatory the way I was taught as a little Catholic kid. And I fell asleep every night doing that. The newspapers, we had two of them when I was a child in the 60s. One was in the morning and one was at night. And once I knew how to read a little bit, I would find the obituary pages and pray for the people that had died. And especially if they weren't Catholic, because our town was kind of half Baptist and half Catholic. And I knew that the Baptists didn't believe in purgatory, so they wouldn't know to pray for their families there. So I did it. That was my thing.
Oh, my dear Nathan, aren't you wonderful?
Well, I was just taught that that was something that anybody could do. My aunts were both first grade teachers. They were Dominican nuns. And one of them told me as a child, but right before First Communion, God listens to everybody. God loves everybody, hears everybody's prayers, but the prayers of children are super powerful. They go straight to God's heart. You won't be child very long. So don't waste your short childhood. Pray for everything and everyone you can think of.
Oh, my goodness.
And so I did that. And so I would fall asleep each night, very busily trying to move people up. I thought of them. My dad would take me to the bank with my little savings account for college, and the people in the bank, it was obvious they planned to make you wait because they had those zigzaggedy rope things inside the
Right.
bank lobby, and you had to get in the line and wait your turn, and you just had to be patient because if you were patient, eventually it would be your turn. So I just imagine the souls in purgatory were in line at the bank, and
Oh,
somebody's on the
no.
cusp of being in heaven, but nobody's praying for them. And so if I prayed one prayer, they would cross the border. That's kind of the way I thought of it. Uh, and I was taught that if yours was the prayer that sprung somebody into heaven, you'd have a friend for all eternity. So it just seemed like low-hanging fruit. I'd pray for
Oh,
whoever was one aggravating prayer short of heaven, and I would provide it. And
oh
then
my God,
I
Nathan,
would
it's
I
so
would feel
funny.
sad for the guy that just got there and saw that the line is long, because nobody wants the line to be long at the grocery store, the bank, or anywhere else.
Oh,
So I
that's
would pray for whoever
wonderful.
just got there, and then I'd pray for somebody in the middle. I would say, Lord, you can put this one toward anybody you want, kind of a wild card prayer. So anyway,
Oh, that's,
it sounds exhausting, but that was fine because I was trying to fall asleep anyway. So I'd fall asleep like that.
I think of all the friends you have in heaven now, and they're all Baptists. I just love that so much.
Yeah, yeah. Well, we'll see how that all turns out, in the great roundup. But in the meanwhile, it took on this other thing. As I said, I'm 67 now. This started, when I was, in my mid 40s, I think.
Oh, that's just wonderful. I just love that so much. All those dear
Well, it's
Baptists.
been a wild ride, and then with all this business, and then I also learned that my voice is consecrated. I'm a Dominican. We're the order of preachers. We lay on the floor of a chapel and are prayed over, and our voices in particular are given over to God's work. And I learned along the way that in the right time and place, that my voice could be borrowed by someone else in order to say what they needed to say. I believe it's a gift of prophecy in the Christian lingo. Uh, or in the Jewish Christian tradition, the prophets allow their voice to become the voice of God for a time.
That is just so beautiful. That's wonderful. But then in due time, then they have then used you in doing this work, and they began to use you doing this work when you were in your 40s. And
Yes,
then
they come about. A dream story like that comes about once a week. So I keep a journal on the nightstand in case that tonight there's a visitor, call them a night visitor. And if one of those occurs, I write it down, say a quick prayer, and go back to sleep. And then now I have, especially during the pandemic when it was so difficult to be together in person, I got used to doing them on Zoom. And so now most Fridays and Saturday mornings, I'm with somebody somewhere around the country. We usually schedule ourselves for 2 hours, and we can do 2 crossings in that amount of time. So right now I'm they're a little backed up. We're recording this on the 20th of June, and I'm only up to about April 10th right now. So I'm trying to get caught up. They don't seem to mind. They do. Some of them pay attention to time and other ones don't, but they're never impatient with me. We get to them when we can.
because there really isn't time where they are, and they have infinity at this point. They
It
have.
depends. They don't all perceive it that way. I thought that at the beginning, but there's not a one size fits all way to be in the afterlife, at least the little peephole I've been looking through. Some of them do know, they pay it. You must know people that pay very little attention to time, don't you?
Well, they're not supposed to be
Well, I
paying
mean, don't you
attention.
have
Maybe
somebody that if
sometimes they do.
do you ever have anybody in your circle, if you make a dinner date and say, let's meet at 7:30, you're pretty confident they won't be there on time?
That's true. That's true. I do know people like that.
Yeah, we have different, orientations toward time, and that doesn't
Right.
end with our death. Sometimes people pay,
Yes. Yeah.
and sometimes if they're really attached strongly to people who are still here, they tend to pay more
They do tend to stay on Earth time. That's absolutely
like
right.
parents who die when they have young children.
Yep. That's
They
true.
want to stay, sometimes want to stay involved in their children's growth, and
Yep.
so
That's very true. They stay
they figure
oriented
out
toward
how
that.
they can pay attention to their kids without being creepy.
but just for people who perhaps haven't heard other interviews that we've done, when you say you're helping them to cross over, my understanding is, just briefly, that when people that you're helping have been helped by their spirit guides or the people who've been coaching them post transition.
Right.
They're now more comfortable with the notion of transitioning, and so their guides have gotten in touch with you, and now they're ready for your help. And that's basically the guide has gotten in touch with you then.
Yes, and their team. I hardly ever work with the other team members, but they make reference to different kinds of things, sort of like counseling. But they have to grow in truth a lot of time. And they have to recognize things that they thought about themselves that were either untrue or maybe had a kernel of truth but got exaggerated in a way that was unhelpful. And sometimes it's the event that caused the death of the body might have created guilt. They might have made a driving accident that not only killed them but others. And so right at the end of their life, they also inherited a bunch of other stuff to work through, trauma. So
right.
It just depends. And then some of them have been murder victims, and they have to decide whether they're going to be angry at their murderer or whether they just give them a pass and, go on, think about other things. People do that very differently.
Forgiveness is very important, and some of them had some things to forgive about themselves or about other people.
Yes, and some people come from families that teach them good forgiveness practices and others don't.
Right, very important.
Sometimes
very
they have
important.
to learn forgiveness as an adult, or even learn it in their life.
Or there was shame attached to their death.
Yes, sometimes they died in a circumstance that they wish they wanted to keep secret, but it got revealed, and so then they have to deal with that.
Right.
There's just, the world has so many stories in it, and
yes,
they're just each. In the book that I'm doing, this will be the third one in this series, and I'm keeping the main title, Afterlife Interrupted, but the subtitle of the next one is going to be Please Let Me Explain. And I'm choosing stories where I think the person who we helped did such a fine job of explaining either their death, what happened immediately afterwards, what has followed. And then we always do a follow-up interview. We don't tell anybody's story publicly without their permission. And it just seems rude in the middle of their transition to say, don't leave yet. We're writing a book. We want to.
That's true. That's true. They're trying to go home, and you stop.
Yeah, they don't need me interrupting about writing a book. So we will, when it's time to write a next book, we'll go back, over all of these. I record all of these sessions and transcribe them and store them. So I have them in their own words in the original vernacular that they used when we first met. And then if we choose to desire to include them in a book, we go back and I try to get with the same prayer partner if they're available and say, let's do a permission asking of this person. I have one to share with you today if our conversation goes that direction. But we get their permission, and that could be a yes or no statement, because all it is us saying, may we use your story, yes or no. But they almost
you can find the same person and ask them for the permission.
It works perfectly. We've never been turned down. We go back into prayer and say, maybe please speak to this person, and they come through. We ask them. There's usually some pleasantries, the way that before we launched this particular podcast this morning, we were talking for about 5 minutes, don't you think, before we went live?
Yeah.
It's just exchanging a few pleasantries, courtesies. We
it's
do that.
Such a small universe.
Well, it is, but and these people, I didn't know them well, but I at least have been a part of their life for an important moment, and so now we get caught up with each other a little bit, and then I'll tell them why we were even thinking of using their story, and they'll elaborate a little bit. And those conversations are usually relatively short, but they're sometimes, and some of my partners like to inquire of them, well, tell us what you've been up to. What have you been doing since you made your crossing? And one of them today was recently talking about, he said, well, one of the things I wanted to do after I made my transition and moved over to the next level, said it became possible for me to visit relatives and friends, but that hadn't been possible for him before. And he said, he called his childhood golden. He said, I had a golden childhood. I know many people didn't, but I had a wonderful childhood. And one of the things I wanted to do was reconnect with people from my childhood. And he said, when you look at a photo album, you might be with your grandmother who's sitting next to you and turning a page and saying, this is the house I grew up in. And there might be a Model T in front of it or something. He said, it's sort of like that now, except she might be saying, this, when I was your age, this is what I looked like. Well, he said, now you do that and you can go right through the page and you can walk into the scene and you can be with your grandmother when she was 10.
Oh, isn't that fascinating?
Yeah. And he said, I've been in scenes where I'm now older than people that were a generation or two older than me, but they're showing me what it was like to be them at a different moment in their life. And so I'm getting to know the backstory of people that I knew here, but getting to know them more richly because they can tell me in their own words and in their own place.
Isn't that beautiful?
Isn't it? Doesn't that sound like eternity is a long time, but I think I could enjoy a long part of it.
Yes.
Just doing that.
People ask me, well, what is there to do there? That there couldn't be much to do? Well, there's infinite fun stuff to do there.
Precisely. Yeah.
Doesn't that sound wonderful? God.
Yeah. Well, anyway, that's what one gentleman I just was working with just chose that.
What story do you have to tell us from your upcoming book? I feel like this is preview of coming attractions.
I thought you'd never ask. I'm glad you did. They come in a dream. And so I'm going to read you the dream because it was just so brief. He came on July 25th, 2022. So coming up on a year ago. I was standing talking with a well-dressed and well-groomed older gentleman. Suddenly he was stricken and fell to the ground. I heard the word clothier, and I awoke. That's not a word you use very often, is it? Clothier?
Not too much, no.
But I know that I've been in a few small menswear stores that have that word attached, and you kind of expect that you're going to be getting a lot of customer service at a clothier place.
Right.
Anyway, when we asked when we made ourselves available to help him, his guardian came through, and we almost always ask for the guardian just to give us a little bit of clarity. So, because dreams can be sort of indistinct by nature. You can, they have some symbology in them, but this one was really simple. It turned out that he was, the word portly. Can you think of a portly gentleman? Do you remember the character actor Sebastian Cabot?
Yes.
He always played those kind of roles, like a gentleman, butler, well-dressed, maybe English. Anyway, this guy had that kind of affect around him. And he had died suddenly, and he said, well, I didn't die violently, but I did die suddenly, so I kind of qualify to be in your line. And I was talking with my friends, a married couple, Michael and Linda, helped with this one. And he described for us the fact that, let's see, hang on just a second. I'm flipping through my pages. He decided that he would disclose to us that he had been homosexual, and he lived at a time when had that been known, it would have been a huge disgrace and a blockage to any kind of career, and he had to kind of navigate that. And one of the things he landed on is he thought, well, I have a fine eye for how men can look good. And he said, without objectifying them and making it a sexual thing, I felt like I had a gift for helping men look their best. So he went into that line of work. And he said he really enjoyed helping people. Most people, if when they are thinking about how they appear, what they look like to other people, most people have some sense of their strengths and weaknesses. Would you say that's true of you?
I don't know.
We're not on camera, but if we were, would you want to make sure your right side or face the camera or your left or
Yeah, I
or you
guess.
well, there's all the especially women's grooming products, there's all kind of concealers,
Yeah.
that there's all kind of ways that we accent the negative or a positive and eliminate the negative. He said that's what he really liked to do. And he said his much of his clientele were people that could afford his service, but he really enjoyed it when somebody that hardly ever had the money to do this kind of thing came in before their wedding or before a job interview, and he would
Sure.
help them assess how they looked. And he said if they would allow me to, I would ask them to tell me an attribute or two of how you look that you like.
Yeah.
Uh, and and he would listen to them, and he would say, "Well, I agree with you. Your hair really is. It looks very good." He said of one man, he said, "Your eyes are sparkly green. Anything that you wear that's green is going to help people look you in the eye."
Huh.
That's a good thing. He was just talking about the two tricks of his craft, and
Right.
he said, "You also have an engaging, gentle smile. So, in order to bring out your smile, I would go with fabrics that suggest gentleness rather than coarseness. I wouldn't dress you in wool because it's scratchy. I would dress you in something softer to match the softness of your smile."
Huh.
So anyway, he was going and he talked about people that were shorter. Most of them wanted to look taller, and so he would describe for them different fabrics that drape in a way that suggest length and flow, and he would help people. And then he said sometimes I'd get an impulse that I would be right in the middle of my work, and I'd get an impulse. Wait a minute, there's something in the back room that would be perfect for this person. And he said usually you had to do some nip and tuck of tailoring to make a thing fit perfectly, but once in a while there'd be something in the back that this was exactly the right person for it. So he went on at length about doing that and how much joy it gave him. And then he compared it. Do you ever watch any of those home improvement shows that are kind of all over the place now? People
I
fixing
don't
up houses.
I don't ever watch TV, so I don't really know anything about
I
them.
have it on around, when I'm doing other things. And a lot of these shows go for an hour. And in the last, I don't know, 10 minutes, they do a reveal. They start you off with some dilapidated thing, and then they show you all the travails of getting it fixed up. And then at the end, the owner or the potential buyer walks through it, and there's a reveal and how beautiful it is.
Oh.
And he said he really enjoyed the reveal part when he could put somebody in front of one of those mirrors that has actually three panels to it,
Uh-huh.
where you can face yourself, but you can also see yourself to the right and the left. He said he liked putting people in those where they could get a good look at themselves looking their best,
Oh,
and
yes.
that he could send people out into the world feeling confident and happy about themselves.
That's nice. Yes.
And he said after his death, he said he was that sometimes the phrase closeted homosexual was used, but he said I wasn't a tennis racket or a pair of work boots. I wasn't an object that one stored in a closet. He didn't like
Oh,
that idea. He said I simply chose to reveal some things about myself to others and keep others to myself. That's the way he spoke of it. Uh,
uh-huh.
but he said, when I got here, they made me recognize that I'd gotten so used to being the potential object of other people's scorn because of my sexuality that they needed to work with me on that. And he was talking with his guardian angel, and his guardian angel said, asked him, "Would you allow me to show myself to you completely as I am?" Isn't that an interesting question?
Yeah.
Would you allow me to show myself to you completely as I am? And he said, well, of course, please do. And then he said his guardian angel kind of turned like a pirouette and went from being the way he was presenting to gloriousness and
Yes.
and fantastic beauty. And then he said, "Now look down, because I'm about to turn back into the way I was presenting myself to you a moment ago." And he said, "We do that routinely with one another, but I want you to see the most glorious version of yourself, and you haven't seen it yet. Are you ready to see it?"
Oh,
And he said, "I suppose." And he said, "Well, all you have to do is turn around." And he had him turn around in front of these three mirrors, and he had to see himself as the perfect child of God that he always was,
and it
without
was.
anybody having an opinion about it, or he having an opinion about it.
Uh-huh.
And he said, "I simply turned around and I saw myself as magnificent, because not because I had an opinion about it, because it was just the reality in front of me or in me." And so he said he showed me my full beauty, and that helped me move along. He left behind some, restricting thoughts about himself, and was ready to go on to a next step. That was part of what he needed to do to cross,
Right. Oh, that's beautiful.
isn't it?
Yes.
So I wanted him. I thought he did such a nice job of explaining it. And of course, I'm summarizing it quickly in a
Yes.
podcast, but it'll be in his own words at length in the new book.
But what is beautiful is that God does see us whole.
Yes.
God sees us as beautiful. I mean, the religions do such terrible things. I mean, I know where that whole homosexual nonsense comes from in the Old Testament, and it has nothing whatsoever to do with who we are. I mean, the religions make such a botch of it. It's
Yeah.
Old Testament nonsense.
Well, and they're at the same time, we're taught that we're all made in the image and likeness of God, and that we're beautiful as God is beautiful. And so
Yes.
oftentimes you get the same religion giving you conflicting messages. I mean, I've lived as a Catholic my whole life, and I was having to sort through those at a first grade level.
Yeah.
I can remember being taught things and just figuring, well, that doesn't sound true to me.
No.
Even as
Not at all.
you know, uh, but that's just a part of the whole big mystery of life.
Yeah, well, that's lovely. That's lovely, Nathan. I think one of the things about your books is that I think they read like candy. They're not they're not heavy in any way. And each of the stories is a beautiful personal story from a real person. They're very touching.
Yes.
Each of the stories is so touching, and each of them is a real person, but none of them are heavy at all. They're very sweet, all of those stories.
They are. Even ones, there are some, we have picked particular stories for particular reasons. And as I said earlier, in this new book, it's going to be because they explain themselves so well. And I think can teach us something. But there are sometimes where they're very dark, awful murders and horrible things that I haven't written that book yet. There are people that die in ways that are quite cruel and awful, but even then they're all redemptive. They all survive.
I was just going to use that same word. Each of the stories has redeeming qualities.
Yes. Yeah. They all get over whatever it was.
Yes.
Particularly one genre is people that die at the hands of the drug cartels. They're often tortured and mocked and stuff before they die, and so people are being extraordinarily cruel to them, and so it can be hard to hear that, even though
they're going to rise above it. So I do,
and that's why it's just that when we do one of those once in a while, instead of doing two in a row, sometimes we just say, that's enough for today.
Yeah.
Sometimes you get a little, you get an insight into uh, people's cruelty, and but at the same time, I am a Christian, and Good Friday turns into Easter morning really quickly.
In
And
all of those stories, yes. Yeah,
yeah,
you always know they're going to come out of it okay, and they're always going to be saved,
doesn't
literally
matter
saved.
whatever it was,
Yes.
and then some of them have moved at a very slow pace in the afterlife, and they appreciate that they weren't made to feel stupid or slow. They just moved at the pace that they chose. And then there's another story that's going to be in the new book of a young guy died at 22 or 3 in a traffic accident, and his advice to people, he wanted to give advice. He said, if you put me in your book, I said, no, wait a minute, we're asking your permission, but that doesn't guarantee you a spot in the book. we're just we're at the front end, we're just doing a little exploring. And he said, well, I'm grateful that you've even included me on the possible list. But he said, if you do put me in the book, here's what I want to tell people: get over it, go fast. Said, push. Whatever it is that you feel like you've got to work through, do it as fast as you can. So that was
Because you want to get to the good part right now.
Well, yeah, he was from this big Italian family, and he died tragically in this accident. And there were, he said, I could have been. He wasn't the driver. He said, I could have been angry at the driver. I could have been angry at God. I could have, he said there were all these other options and things I could have done. And he said, I just think we had a really bad day. That's the way he called the day.
It was just a bad day.
It was a bad day. The guy, he was in a 15-passenger van with a group of people being brought to a work site inside a refinery. And the guy that was driving it had never driven one before. And there was a fire in the refinery, and he had to turn around in a place where there was barely enough room to turn around. And as it turned out, there wasn't enough room, and they tumbled down a hill and into nasty river or something inside a refinery. Do you remember the comic, the Far Side?
I remember the Far Side, yeah.
Yeah, it was usually a one-panel comic, and it ran for about 15 years, I think. And one of my favorites, which was kind of iconic, was one called The Crisis Center. Do you happen to remember it?
I don't know whether I do.
I'll describe it for you and your listeners. It's only one panel, and it doesn't have a caption because it doesn't need one. It's a picture of a 3-story building that must have been swept away in a flood because it's floating in a river, and it's on fire, and it's about to go over a waterfall. Every possible crisis is happening at the crisis center. There's been a flood and a fire, and you're about to go over a cliff.
It was a bad day. Yes.
Yeah, it was a bad day, and he had enough time. He was in the middle seat of a 15-passenger van, so he had no access to a window, and nobody was wearing a seatbelt, and he was about to fall off the edge of a cliff where it could catch fire, or it could land in nasty water inside a refinery and drown. So he had a moment to think, damn, I'm in the crisis center. I could die any of these 3 ways.
Oh, Lord.
And he did. And his guardian plucked him out before he could be burned or drowned or anything, and grabbed him and put him off to the side and said, do you understand that your body's over there and you're over here?
Yes.
Yes. And do you understand that I've got you and you're safe? Yes. And then his guardian said, you can he called his guardian Tinkerbell. He decided to name his angel Tinkerbell for that one in Walt Disney. Is right. That's the Tinkerbell. Anyway, he said Tinkerbell did a good job of getting me out of there. And then she said to me, you can either look over there where he said, your body has carried you through lots of things, but it couldn't carry you through that.
Right.
It's over there and you're over here, but you're safe. You can look over there if you want to, and we'll stay here as long as until you say the word. And we'll leave as soon as you say the word. And he said, well, there was no reason to sit there. So I said, go ahead, let's go wherever you're going to take me. And he just went with it. He did that well.
Just listen to what Father Nathan just said. If you're going to be in a fatal accident, that's how it happens. You're out of your body before the fatal accident. It's the easiest possible way to die, I
keep
think.
hearing that over and over again. They said I flew through the windshield, but I wasn't in my body at the time.
Right. That's what happens.
Yeah.
To me, that's the easiest possible way to go. That or going in your sleep. That's another easy way to go. But
Yeah.
very easy.
I've been through so many car
we
crashes.
could keep doing this. I just noticed we are totally out of time.
All right.
No, I can't. I just can't stop listening to you. I think that you're just delightful.
Well, you've had me on 7 times now. That's I'm so grateful that you've found my stories worth telling. I really, it comes back to my vocation is to preach Jesus and Him risen, and that we're risen from the dead is the central message of the faith I've been raised in, and so why not tell it?
Well, everything whenever you talk, I can't stop listening to you. I think it's so delightful. Your vocation, you live to the full, and this is just beautiful. Everything you talk about is beautiful.
Well, likewise.
What do you want people to take away from their experience listening to you today?
That they are eternal, and that it just gets better and better. It just gets better and better if you let it. And if you'll accept the good and the bad, and just move moment by moment through life, doing the best you can and trying to be of service to other people. But remember, you're going to survive all this, and there's a great many joys awaiting us. And there's no one size fits all for it too. You get to be the crafter of what your afterlife will be.
You are crafting it even as we speak. But it is eternal. That's absolutely right.
Yes.
My dear, please give yourself the biggest hug from me. Thank you so much. We will be doing this again.
All right. Well, God bless you. Thanks for having me on.
God bless you too, my dear. And Father Nathan's website is nathan-castle.com, and his book will be out. His third book will be out in the fall. Please watch for it. And if you haven't read the first 2, you are in for a treat. Just get yourself those books because, as I say, I mean, they talk about some horrible deaths, but everybody comes out fine because life is eternal, guaranteed. That's one thing we can absolutely guarantee you all about. So everyone, as you know, you are eternal. That is the big, big message. And again, we have come to the end of our time. This has been Seek Reality with Roberta Grimes. I'm so happy you could be with us today. Please never forget that you are a powerful, eternal being. You never began, you never will end. And when you really get what that means, it changes everything in your life for the better. Next week, our guest will be Joyce Stewart. She's a really curious spiritual teacher and energy healer. She's always bringing up something new, and she's one of several people whose work I've been following for years because she keeps bringing me helpful new things that I can share with you. And this is going to be her 9th Seek Reality visit. We'll be talking about the power of our minds, our thoughts and our words, and how we ourselves have the power to heal our own minds. Please be sure to join us next week. And this week, we've gone right off the end of our time because we've been so much enjoying visiting with and listening to our wonderful friend, Father Nathan Castle, who's been with us for the 7th, but not the last time. Our 6th level friend, Mikey Morgan, tells us that as many as a quarter of the people who currently transition don't do it smoothly or right away. And some of them are rescued. A lot of them are rescued pretty quickly, but in some cases, the rescue is not so quick or smooth because often the person has gone off track and feels immobilized and by guilt, by shame, and some other more complex situations. Our precious friend, Father Nathan, is called in by that person's guides to help once the one who has transitioned feels ready to complete the journey. And as Father Nathan says, maybe they're in purgatory or something. And Father Nathan is a Dominican priest who amazingly has been chosen by beings not in bodies to undertake this sensitive and difficult task. And it just shows you what a beautiful soul he truly is. You really will enjoy his book, so, give yourself that treat. And of course, it's time once again for us to mention that Seek Reality Online is your one-stop resource for all things afterlife. Just go to seekreality.com and start to learn for yourself that your own reality really is eternal. Learn the ultimate truth from Craig Hogan himself, who is the ultimate expert on all things afterlife. As you know by now, my own nonfiction books are Liberating Jesus, My Thomas, The Fun of Dying, The Fun of Staying in Touch, The Fun of Growing Forever, The Fun of Living Together. For young children, there's The Fun of Meeting Jesus, and you can order all these books through bookstores on Amazon.com, in barnesandnoble.com, just about anywhere you can find books, and most of the adult books are available as audiobooks as well. If you want to talk to me about anything at all, just contact me through the green contact block on robertagrimes.com. I answer every email. Just be sure I get your correct email address. And meanwhile, this has been Seek Reality with Roberta Grimes. Please enjoy and always make the most of this coming week in our one reality, knowing that you are a powerful, eternal being, and most of all in this entire universe, you are infinitely loved.
You've been listening to Seek Reality with Roberta Grimes. Roberta blogs and answers questions at robertagrimes.com. Join us every week as we explore what the afterlife evidence and modern science combine to tell us is true about the one reality we all share. Knowing the truth changes everything.